Welcome back, lovely ladies. If you want to become the woman of your dreams, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. And join our Patreon for even more exclusive content. Now, let's dive into today's story.
They were an unusual trio, the kind that seemed held together more by the gaps left by everyone else than by any natural affinity. They had spent their teenage years on the margins of a small town that prided itself on tradition and appearances. Now, as young adults, they were all finally old enough to make their own decisions, but in some ways, still struggling to find their place. Yet each leaned on the others, forming a makeshift family of sorts. On this particular Saturday evening, they gathered in Jim's cramped living room. Paul, Jim, and Kate, friends since school, now navigating the uncertain waters of adulthood. Paul slouched at the edge of Jim's worn-out armchair, a place of honor if only because it was the least lumpy seat in the room. He stood out from the others in obvious ways. Tall and wiry, with short brown hair parted neatly to one side, Paul wore a crisp button-down shirt, pressed khakis, and loafers that looked brand new. The way he held himself, careful posture, deliberate gestures, revealed a man accustomed to minding every detail. He seemed almost too polished for the faded wallpaper and cheap furniture around him. Paul's face bore that anxious intensity of someone forever in the shadow of parental expectations. He was the son of the town's richest man, and he had been placed on a path not entirely of his own choosing. At the State University, he studied business administration, lived in a dorm near his father's old fraternity, drove a new BMW, and possessed a wardrobe from fine retailers. Yet despite these advantages, Paul had never really fit in anywhere. In high school, he had been labeled a geek, spending Friday nights hunched over a desk, crammed with textbooks. Now, at the fraternity, he found himself confronted by a world he didn't fully understand, where charm and charisma mattered more than academic accolades. Jim, perched on the old sofa, was his opposite in many ways. Short and slight, just about 5'4", he weighed barely 120 pounds. He had always been the smallest boy in their class, and that label had followed him into adulthood. Even now, at 20, he looked younger, with a soft face and gentle brown eyes that made him appear perpetually boyish. His sandy hair fell unevenly around his ears, and he wore faded jeans and a simple t-shirt. As a kid, Jim had never cared about size or status. He'd adapted, making his lack of physical presence into a quiet confidence that life would turn out okay somehow. After high school, he stayed in town, working at the local boutique as a handyman and janitor to make ends meet. It was a modest life, and he wasn't ashamed of it. Besides, he held a secret that had given him a peculiar kind of resilience. He enjoyed dressing as a woman in private. Since he was a young teen, he had developed a feminine alter ego he called Jasmine, a presence that allowed him to see the world from a different angle. He kept this hidden from almost everyone, including Kate and Paul, until now. He had never found the right time to tell them. Kate sat closest to the door, arms folded. She had the posture of someone ready to stand up and tackle a problem at a moment's notice. She was of similar height to Jim, but carried a rounder figure, Rubenesque and strong. She had a square jaw and blonde hair that fell past her shoulders, often left unstyled and a bit tangled. A few acne scars marked her cheeks, and though easily concealable, she never bothered with makeup. Kate's tough exterior came from a childhood marred by a difficult family situation. Her father had been abusive, leaving her wary of men and protective of her own vulnerabilities. This past shaped her tendency to shield Jim from bullies back in school. She had once delivered swift retribution to anyone who dared mock him. Underneath that armor, though, lay kindness and loyalty. She had carried a quiet admiration for Paul for years, an unspoken fondness that no one quite dared to name, least of all herself. The three of them had no illusions about how others saw them. They had been an isolated trio in high school, bonding over shared rejections. They were still somewhat on the outside looking in, even as adults, but at least they had each other. "All right, Paul," Kate said, breaking the silence. "Tell us why you called us all together." Her voice was clear, firm, and held the memory of all the times she had taken charge before. Paul inhaled deeply as if trying to gather courage. "My father got me into this fraternity, Alpha Delta Omega," he began. "It's his old fraternity from college. He picked my university, my major, and now this. He says I need the connections, the right circle. The problem is, I'm not their kind of guy. These brothers are confident, athletic, worldly. They are, if I am honest, a bunch of guys who know exactly how to impress people. They're what you might call players." Kate lifted her eyebrows. "Players?" Paul nodded. "They know how to talk to women. They're smooth. The upperclassmen have made it clear that, as a pledge, I need to show them I fit in. They expect me to show up with an impressive date, someone who turns heads." Kate rolled her eyes. "So they want proof you're cool by having a gorgeous girlfriend?" Paul spread his hands helplessly. "In their world, yes. I need someone they'll consider a knockout. If I fail, I can practically hear the condescending whispers already." Jim leaned forward. "And how do you think we can help?" Paul sighed and looked down at the floor. "I don't know any such girl. I mean, I know women at the university, but I'm not exactly on their radar. And I'm terrified that if I hire a professional escort, someone might recognize her. That would be worse than not having a date at all." Kate shrugged. "I'm not that kind of showstopper, Paul. Besides, I'm not particularly interested in, well, I'm hardly the glamorous type. My hair alone probably disqualifies me." There was a dry humor in her tone, but also an edge of truth. She knew she didn't fit the mold of a glossy sorority girl. The room fell silent. Paul's desperation was palpable, and both Kate and Jim felt it. They knew how important this was for him. Years of friendship allowed them to read each other's moods, and right now, Paul was anxious enough to try almost anything. Minutes passed, the quiet broken only by the faint hum of traffic outside. Kate tapped her foot, Jim fiddled with the hem of his shirt, and Paul stared off into some distant worry. Then at length, Jim looked up. He took a breath and cleared his throat. "I might have a solution," he said softly, his voice a little unsteady. Both Kate and Paul snapped their attention to Jim. He rarely made bold proposals. He was the kind who blended into the background, offering small insights rather than big revelations. Jim continued. "It's unconventional. Hear me out." He walked to the cabinet beside his old TV and pulled out a DVD. "Tootsie." He held it up. "Have either of you ever seen this movie?" Kate squinted. "A long time ago, maybe. The one where the guy pretends to be a woman to get a part?" Paul nodded slowly. "I think I know it. Yes." Jim set the DVD down. "I want you both to watch this movie now. Just trust me. I'll step out, and when it's over, I'll come back. By then, maybe you'll understand what I'm getting at." Before they could protest, Jim popped the disc in, pressed play, and slipped out of the apartment. Paul and Kate exchanged baffled looks as the film started, but they watched. It was a story about a man who dons a female persona and succeeds in ways he never expected. By the time the credits rolled, both were quiet, thoughtful. A knock came at the door. Paul called, "Come in." The door opened, and a tall, graceful redhead entered. She wore a black dress that hugged every curve, her shapely figure accentuated by elegant heels. Dramatic makeup highlighted large, expressive eyes, and gentle waves of auburn hair fell across smooth shoulders. She carried herself with a delicate poise that made it seem as if she had always lived in those heels. Kate and Paul simply stared, speechless. The woman paused inside the doorway, lips curved in a playful smile, and then she spoke. It was Jim's voice, gentle but unmistakable, issuing from this beautiful stranger. "So," said Jim, "what do you think?" Paul's jaw dropped. "Jim, is that really you?" The redhead stepped closer, offering a hand with slender, manicured fingers. "This," she said, "is Jasmine. I've been dressing like this since I was about 12, just never told anyone." Her voice was calm, neither overtly masculine nor convincingly feminine, but the visual illusion was so strong it hardly mattered. Kate circled around, scanning Jasmine from all angles. "This is incredible. Your makeup, your hair, the outfit. You look like a runway model. I never would have guessed." Paul's eyes were wide. He tried to speak, but he only managed a strangled, "You, wow." Eventually, he gathered himself. "Jasmine, you look amazing, but how will this help me?" Jasmine smiled. "You need a date that will leave your fraternity brothers speechless. You need someone they'll never doubt. I think I can be that girl, with a little more professional help and refinement. But you have to trust me, and you have to trust Kate." Kate nodded slowly. "I think we can make this work. Paul will need some funds, a professional makeover, top-quality attire, maybe some enhancements. Jasmine can dress beautifully already, but we can push it further." Paul reached into his pocket and produced a credit card without hesitation. "Whatever it takes. Just help me pull this off." The plan, once set, took 2 weeks to bring together. The upcoming fraternity gathering, a casual weekend party, would be the stage. It was not a grand, formal event, but rather a test of social clout. Every pledge had been told to bring a date who would impress the brothers and their guests. Paul had to show up with Jasmine on his arm, the perfect vision of a confident, glamorous companion. Kate busied herself making appointments. She found a transformation studio in the nearest city that catered to all kinds of clients. Jasmine was taken there under the cover of secrecy. In a private suite, skilled stylists shaped eyebrows, styled wigs, selected the perfect colors for blush and lipstick, and fitted a custom breast form beneath a low-cut dress. The result was stunning. Even Jim could barely recognize himself. He blinked at his reflection in the mirror. Long lashes, elegant collarbone, an hourglass figure enhanced by careful padding. He knew his voice might give him away if he spoke too much, so Kate and Paul decided he should remain mostly silent that evening, playing the role of a mysterious woman who preferred to let others talk. The dress Kate chose for Jasmine was a deep burgundy with a plunging neckline. It fit so well that it looked tailor-made, accentuating a figure that suggested confidence and allure. High heels, matching jewelry, and a stylish clutch completed the picture. Jasmine practiced walking in those heels endlessly over the next few days, learning how to sway the hips just enough without appearing forced. Kate, rough around the edges though she was, gave surprisingly good pointers on posture and the subtle body language that could captivate an audience. When the evening arrived, Paul was a bundle of nerves. He had rented a sleek car to supplement the BMW, just to make the right impression. At precisely the appointed time, he knocked on Jim's apartment door. Kate answered and called out, "Jasmine, your date is here." When Jasmine appeared, Paul caught his breath. She looked even better than he remembered. The stylists had outdone themselves, and the subtle details, tame perfume, a hint of sparkle in the earrings, the gentle curl of the wig's ends, combined to give the impression of an elegant socialite. Jasmine gave Paul a small nod, as if to say, "We've got this." Paul offered his arm, and together they headed to the fraternity house. Inside, music pulsed through the halls. The fraternity house buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the occasional holler from someone showing off. As soon as Paul entered with Jasmine, heads turned, whispers spread quickly. Who was this new woman on Paul's arm? For once, Paul felt proud, confident, as if he finally belonged. Jasmine played the part perfectly, leaning in close to Paul, smiling politely when introduced, and offering a gentle squeeze of his arm every now and then to let him know she was there for him. One fraternity brother, a linebacker of a man named Reggie, stepped forward with a grin. "Paul, didn't think you had it in you. Introduce us." Paul cleared his throat, trying to keep calm. "This is Jasmine," he said, carefully omitting any backstory. Jasmine lowered her gaze slightly, offered her hand, and nodded but said little. This silence only added to her mystique. Reggie, apparently dazzled, just smiled and said, "Great to meet you." As the evening progressed, Paul guided Jasmine through the crowd, making small talk, collecting approving nods from seniors who had barely acknowledged him before. In this environment, image was everything, and Paul's image had skyrocketed. Jasmine's appearance was like a stamp of credibility, proof that Paul was not just some bookish kid with money, but a man with a charming companion who chose to be at his side. Meanwhile, Kate had her own assignment to help cement Paul's new reputation. Later that night, Paul was supposed to excuse himself from the party and lead Jasmine toward his first-floor bedroom. This was all part of a larger plan to create the illusion that he and his date were on incredibly close terms. The fraternity valued confidence in romance, and a pledge who brought a date that seemed genuinely captivated by him would earn instant respect. To heighten the effect, Kate would join them secretly through an open window, staying out of sight, but ready to play her part. The key element was to generate an unmistakable impression of Paul's prowess and desirability. A subtle strategy would be best. No explicit displays, of course, but a strong suggestion that Paul was more than just a good student. So once everyone had a chance to see Jasmine on Paul's arm, once the drinks and music had made the atmosphere electric, Paul quietly led her out of the living room and toward his bedroom. The fraternities were known for their telltale signal. A garment hung over the doorknob often implied privacy. Paul slipped out with Jasmine, and soon the door to his room was closed. Moments later, Kate crawled through the open window, silent as a cat. Inside the small, dimly lit room, the three huddled together. They had rehearsed this. While Jasmine sat on the edge of the bed, and Paul sat beside her, Kate moved near the wall that faced the hallway. The plan was that Kate would speak up in a loud, enthusiastic voice, as if encouraging some grand and thrilling moment. The idea was to let those in the hall believe something very romantic and intense was happening. They would not be explicit. They would only say things open to many interpretations, enough that anyone listening would be convinced that Paul was not just passing time, but actively impressing a companion who adored him. Kate pressed her ear to the wall and started voicing spirited exclamations that hinted at excitement. She managed to call out Paul's name in a tone that suggested admiration. Paul tapped the headboard lightly against the wall in a gentle rhythm, as if indicating lively enthusiasm behind closed doors. Jasmine, not wanting to ruin the illusion with her masculine voice, simply offered soft giggles now and then, muffled enough so no one would question it. From outside, anyone passing by would assume Paul's date was thoroughly enamored of him. The laughter, the murmured words of approval, the soft thumps, none of it explicit, but all of it suggestive, combined into a narrative that Paul was now a man of undeniable appeal. A few minutes later, Paul cracked open the door and poked his head out, adopting a casual, confident smirk. He faked a yawn, grinned at a group of wide-eyed brothers, and said something like, "Anyone know where I can get some refreshments? We're just getting started in here." Then he winked. The brothers gaped, taken aback. Only a few hours ago, Paul was just another pledge. Now he seemed like a different man, exuding a calm, knowing self-assurance. Word spread through the house. Paul, the quiet legacy pledge, had shown up with a stunner and was now carrying on with enviable charm. Back in the room, once Paul closed the door, he sank onto the bed and exhaled. "That was intense," he said quietly. He looked at Jasmine, who was adjusting her wig in the mirror, and at Kate, who was trying not to laugh at her own performance. "I think it worked," he said. "I think they're convinced." Kate grinned. "I have a feeling they'll be talking about this for a while." Jasmine gave them both a thumbs up. Despite the odd circumstances, the three friends knew this was a turning point. Paul had found a way to gain the fraternity's respect without compromising who he was deep down. Granted, it involved a grand illusion, but in an environment that placed so much stock in appearances, it was ironically fitting that appearances would be the solution. A couple of hours later, as the party wound down, Paul helped Kate slip back out the window so she could return home without being seen. He and Jasmine lingered in the bedroom a while longer, waiting until the halls were quiet. They knew the story had taken root. Now all that remained was for Jasmine to make a brief, eye-catching exit to complete the evening's impression. Toward dawn, when a few brothers were still roaming the halls, they made their move. Jasmine stepped out in slightly rumpled attire, just enough to suggest a memorable evening. Paul escorted her through the living room, past open-mouthed onlookers who gave him nods of approval or clapped him on the shoulder. Some even offered knowing smiles, as if to say, "You've earned your place here." As the two of them reached the car, Jasmine shot Paul a playful grin. Once inside, with the doors closed, they both burst into quiet laughter. The pressure was gone. The plan executed perfectly. Paul started the car and drove Jasmine back toward Jim's place. On the way, they passed early morning joggers and sleepy students headed for weekend shifts. The world was waking up, and the three friends were entering a new chapter. The aftermath of that night changed their dynamics. Paul, once timid and bookish, gained a subtle confidence. He no longer felt so overshadowed by his father's expectations or the fraternity's demands. He had proven something to himself. He could navigate this strange social world with the help of his friends. And more importantly, he began to spend more time with Kate away from the fraternity drama, discovering that behind her tough exterior was a loyal companion he wanted to know better. Jasmine's frequent appearances continued over the next couple of years whenever Paul needed to attend a formal dance or a special event. Each time, Jim's skills at presenting as Jasmine improved, and Kate honed her makeover talents. Soon, Jasmine had become almost an open secret between the three of them, a source of pride, amusement, and creative expression. For Jim, being Jasmine among his dearest friends was a relief. He no longer had to hide that part of himself. Kate helped refine Jasmine's wardrobe, introducing Jim to more subtle makeup techniques and stylish outfits. Paul's fraternity brothers knew Jasmine only as Paul's captivating friend, who appeared now and then at important gatherings, never speaking too much but always making an impression. In parallel, Paul and Kate grew closer. Without the pressure of that first frantic night, They spent quiet afternoons together at coffee shops off campus, getting to know each other on honest terms. Kate allowed herself to relax in his presence. Paul discovered that Kate's protective shell hid a heart that was compassionate and wise. He appreciated her humor, her directness, and the care she had always shown him and Jim. Kate found in Paul someone kind and respectful, a man who cared about more than just appearances, and who, beneath all the social anxiety, had dreams of his own. Over time, their friendship deepened into a quiet partnership. By the time of the fraternity's Christmas dance in their junior year, Paul decided to bring both Kate and Jasmine to the event. Kate had worked hard to improve her style under Jasmine's tutelage. She learned about flattering silhouettes, proper skincare routines, and subtle cosmetics that brought out the warmth in her face. Her blonde hair was washed, brushed, and styled into soft waves. That evening, when Paul picked them up, he almost didn't recognize Kate. She stood tall and poised in a deep green dress, her eyes shining with anticipation. Jasmine, as always, was impeccable, this time in a flowing champagne-colored gown. When the three arrived at the venue, Paul entered flanked by two striking companions. The whispers started again, but this time not in surprise at Paul's sudden charisma. Now people just accepted that Paul was a man of taste and substance, and that these two women, one a long-standing friend, the other a mysterious beauty, chose to accompany him. The reputation he had carefully cultivated blossomed. He wasn't mocked or doubted now. He was admired. As their college years progressed, Paul rose within the fraternity's ranks, eventually becoming the chapter president. His reputation as a man with refined social graces and good judgment earned him the respect of his peers. No one knew the full truth of how that had come to pass, how much he owed to Jasmine and Kate, but that hardly mattered. What mattered was that he had built a bridge to a world he once thought was closed to him. After graduation, Paul returned home and took over his father's company. By then, he and Kate had officially started dating, discovering a shared sense of purpose and affection that only deepened over time. They often reminisced about those early days, the nervousness of that first party, the hilarious misdirections and whispered plotting, the intricate efforts to present Jasmine to the world. Jim, still working at the boutique, now found he had a small clientele who trusted his fashion sense. With Kate's encouragement, he considered exploring a career in styling or makeup artistry. The skills he had developed as Jasmine were not just personal, they could be professional assets too. When Paul finally asked Kate to marry him, she accepted without hesitation. They planned a small wedding, intimate but elegant, where only their closest friends and family would attend. On the day of the ceremony, among the bridesmaids stood Jasmine, serving proudly as the maid of honor. That morning, Jim spent hours getting Jasmine's look perfect. Soft curls, a subtle rose-hued lipstick, and a gown that complemented Kate's dress. Standing at the altar, the three of them formed a silent testament to their unlikely alliance. Here were three friends who had started life as misfits in a small town, who had faced challenges and grown together. In the photographs taken that day, one can see the groom, tall and confident, holding the hand of his radiant bride. Beside them, the maid of honor with shining eyes, a reminder that sometimes you must take creative paths to find your footing in the world. The townsfolk, those who remembered them as awkward kids, might never understand all the layers of that story. But the three friends knew. As the reception wound down and the newlyweds danced, Jasmine slipped out to the garden behind the hall. It was a warm evening, the sky a gentle purple. After a few minutes, Kate and Paul followed, each holding a glass of sparkling cider. They stood in a quiet corner, the three of them, just like old times, but now transformed. Without words, they acknowledged how far they had come. The old insecurities were replaced by trust and mutual appreciation. Paul reached out and lightly squeezed Jasmine's hand. Kate looped her arm around Paul's waist. In that soft twilight, they were no longer defined by the judgments of others. They had forged their own story, one of friendship, resilience, and shared growth. And if someone were to walk by and see them, they might just think what a fine, loving family they made.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.